Thanks, Beth. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to talking about fathers. I watched Big Fish for about the third time, I think, yesterday. Pardon me. How many people have seen the movie? Or the better question is, how many have not seen the movie? Okay, well, it ends like this. Okay, I don't really have any spoilers here. I think you can probably imagine a few ways it could go. This is the story, as many of you know, of a very extravagant fellow named Edward Bloom, the father, and his son Will. And I want to start by just calling your attention to something. It's fairly late in the movie, but it's not really giving anything away, I don't think. Dr. Bennett is the elderly doctor at this point who delivered Will. And of course, Will's father, Edward, has a florid, elaborate story about the birth and everything that happened before and during and after. And Dr. Bennett says to Will, "Would you like to know the real story of what happened?" And he said, "I would." And Dr. Bennett says, "You came a week early. Your father was away in Wichita on business. He missed it." And Will says, tellingly says, "I like your version," all right, rather than his father's version. I'm not giving away too much to say that there is some disagreement between father and son over whether telling stories represents some kind of a reality or is just fakery and lies. So Edward Bloom was the kind of guy from his start, you'll see early in the movie, very outgoing, energetic, determined to get what he wanted. And he stitched together a life, and he stitches together a life in the movie from people he's met, experiences he's had, and you might say he elaborates a bit on some of these stories. But there is a core, I think you'll agree with me, of emotional truth in all of these things. The particulars may be made up, exaggerated, maybe didn't happen at all, but there's something about the stories that rings true. So I wanted to use that to introduce this, to just say that from a scientific perspective, what we're looking at here is a connection. There's a very profound and strong connection between Edward and Will in this film. Maybe it's at its strongest during a 3-year period where they don't speak to each other. And I won't say too much about that because I don't want to give away too much, but you can imagine that a concerted effort not to speak to somebody, to avoid somebody, reflects a certain kind of connection, right? We wouldn't work that hard not to speak to somebody if there wasn't a reason for it, and that reason is a kind of connection. So what does science say about the connection between fathers and sons? And much of what I'm saying applies to fathers and daughters as well, but we're talking about a son in this case here. So let me start with one study that was done in 2004 by a guy named Ross Park, who's a leader in the field of fathers research he's at the University of California, now retired from University of California, Riverside. And he wanted to look at children's social development and look at their fathers. I think we all, those of us who have children want our kids to be socially adept and competent and well-liked and able to accomplish the things they want to do. And it turns out that a good relationship with a father is very important for that. Some of you may feel this in your gut. Some of you may feel you've experienced it. Others of you who perhaps were not close to your father might, or not close to your children, might feel that this isn't so important. But here's what the research shows. As far back as World War II, researchers looked at families in which fathers were absent. And they found that those children from ages 4 to 8 had difficulty with peer relationships. Okay, now that's not necessarily an obvious thing. Father's away, mother's around. We're not talking about kids in an institution where they're badly cared for. Mother's around, they're in their home. Their parents are married in most cases. The father's off in Europe somewhere during World War II or Japan. And these kids had less successful peer relationships. The same thing was true in a study of the sons of Norwegian sailors. For those of you who aren't familiar with Norwegian sailing, which includes me, there are a lot of Norwegian sailors, and they go away for a very long time. And their children were less popular in school than the children of fathers who were around. Now, we don't know, for many of these things I'm going to tell you, we don't know why that's the case. We don't know how that happens. So the research is at a point where we can say, here's something that's important, it happens. We don't know why, but we know it happens, and it argues for the fact that fathers should be around. And you'll see very early in Big Fish that Edward was often not around. He was a traveling salesman by trade. And so you might think about that in terms of some of the things I'm talking about, and whether you think that his being away so often, or how you think that might have affected his relationship with his son. Of course, every time he came back from a trip, he had new stories to tell, because that was his way. So, these stories are playful in a sense. And play is a critically important thing for fathers and kids. So the one piece of fathers' research that I think a lot of us know, and didn't need my book or any other book to tell them, is that fathers play with kids differently than mothers do. Okay, the technical scientific term for this is rough and tumble play. So fathers are more likely to get down on the floor, roll around, wrestle, jump out from behind the couch and scare the kids, or, we had a game at our house where my father used to, when my mother worked at night, my father would turn off all the lights in the house and come after my sister and me, and damn it, he would always go for me and give my sister the break. I still haven't quite reconciled why she got the easy shot on that. But it's the kind of thing that fathers do, and it's often talked about by researchers as a bridge to the world outside the family. The father is a bridge to the outside world. And the reason is because, excuse me, things in families can be predictable and expected, and we know how our parents behave and our kids. But in the social world outside the family, that's not the case. Unexpected things happen, even in school. Somebody's your friend one day and not your friend the next day, and you don't know why, what happened, and a lot of unpredictability. And the thought is that this kind of activity by fathers, the way fathers play, helps prepare children for those unexpected kinds of developments in their social lives. So these kids are consequently more able to handle those relationships, more popular, and so forth. Now, this connection with fathers and kids begins much earlier than you might have thought. So fathers begin to have, so we know that mothers undergo all kinds of hormonal changes during pregnancy. What we didn't know until very recently is that fathers undergo hormonal changes during pregnancy. They experience a drop in testosterone. It's a primary thing. There are a few other hormones that change. Now, this is before, this is the fetus, developing fetus. Father has had, aside from his one important, brief biological connection to that fetus, he's had no contact with it at all. He hasn't seen it except on a kind of a crummy ultrasound picture, maybe. And he has no contact, and yet his body physically is responding to the presence of the fetus. And furthermore, when the child is born, brain scanners show that fathers' brains begin to change, even looking at pictures of their baby, and certainly when they hear them cry. So in the prefrontal cortex, parts of the brain associated with emotion and so forth, the brains change in response to infants' cries. Now, we might not be so surprised at this with regard to mothers, but I was surprised to discover, and so have scientists who are doing this work, that there's this profound connection between fathers and their kids. So connection is what I'm getting at, because I think that's what sets up the movie. Excuse me. So you won't see any brain scans in Big Fish, and you won't see any measurements of hormone levels, but I think the science and the film are telling the same story about this connection. Now, interestingly, a lot of this film is about language. Because it's a movie, we see this father's stories dramatized and presented to us. But remember that Will is just hearing them told. So it's all about language. And studies of fathers and children's language show that fathers are critically important for language development in children. Now, in this day and age, we have many two-income families, and mothers and fathers pass the baby back and forth and have all kinds of exotic arrangements to try to get to work on time. So you might think that fathers wouldn't have this extraordinary importance in language development. And in many families, despite the fact that there are two wage earners, mothers still spend more time with the kids. In fact, the statistics show that mothers spend more time in child care than fathers do. Child care is not the same as playing, of course, but mothers do spend a lot of time with their kids. So what happens with language development? Researchers at the University of North Carolina looked at fathers and mothers and kids, and they found, first of all, that fathers had a much more important impact on children's language development, and secondly, that mothers had almost none. So both of these were surprising, and the thinking is, again, it has to do with that sort of bridge to the outside world. For fathers who spend less time with their kids, they're going to be less attuned to their kids' vocabularies. And the reason for this importance of fathers seems to be that fathers use a lot more words that their kids don't know. And and that may be frustrating to the kids at times, but over a period of time, that pulls the kids along, and those kids have bigger vocabularies if they spend time with their fathers and have a good relationship with their fathers. They want, the good relationship is important because that's what makes them want to try to imitate their fathers and struggle to pronounce those new words and figure out what they mean. So a whole series of things happen. These kids have faster language development before school and in preschool. A critical thing in childhood is the transition to school. They do better at that. They do better in elementary school, and some of these things have consequences into middle age. So again, another very important thing about fathers. And a couple of sobering statistics, not directly related to what you'll see in the movie tonight, but worth keeping in mind just to underscore the importance of the connection between fathers and kids. For fathers who are not around during their partner's pregnancy, the death rate of those kids is how much greater, do you think? Think about it for a minute. So fathers who are around during their partner's pregnancy, fathers who are not around during their partner's pregnancy, how much greater is the risk for those kids? So think about what that might be. It turns out the death rate for those infants with the father not around is nearly 4 times the death rate of kids whose fathers are around. It's from all kinds of causes, all kinds of things. We don't know why, but there it is. It's very clear in the research. We know that depressed mothers can increase that depression in mothers increases the risk of depression in kids. Depression in fathers increases the risk of depression in their kids. And involvement by fathers, even if a mother is depressed, can help counteract that increase in risk of depression in the kids. Now, I know what you're thinking. Does anybody know anybody who's a single mother? What about those folks? What's going on there? If fathers are so important, lots of people are single mothers for all kinds of reasons. I have a friend who, we talk about women who are single mothers by choice. And I have a friend who is a single woman who adopted a child, and she says, I'm not a single mother by choice. I just couldn't find anybody. I didn't want to be a single mother. I didn't choose to be a single mother. But I wanted a child, so I am a single mother. So the research doesn't show that all the children of single mothers will do terribly in life. Nothing like that. In fact, the children of single mothers do fine in all kinds of ways. But because fathers make some unique contributions, it might be important for single mothers to have their children spend time with a brother that they're close to, a neighbor, a friend, a cousin. It's important to have men in the kids' lives, and a cousin or a brother can't do everything that a father in the house can do. but that person can do some of it and do a lot and help. So I like to think that by making this point about the importance of fathers, I'm giving single mothers some information they might find useful and helpful. And in no sense am I trying to be critical, nor are the people who do this research trying to be critical of single mothers. And nobody says that's a bad choice. It's just different. Beth, how are we on time? Beth? I'm not quite sure what time the screening starts, but I'm about to wrap up. And if there's a little more time, I wouldn't mind taking a question or two if you want to do that. So Big Fish, the story that Big Fish tells us and the story that science tells us are the same story. There's a profound connection between fathers and children, more than we might have expected. And you'll see in Big Fish that it's a bumpy, bumpy road for these two men as they try to come to terms. And it's not clear how they will come to terms with this difference of opinion that they have. So I would love you to think of fathers as very important in their children's lives. Think of the science story a little bit as you watch the movie, but don't let it keep you from getting wrapped up in the emotions of the movie. And think of fathers as what they have always been, big fish. Thank you. Do we have time? A couple questions? Okay. Okay, we do have time for a couple of questions. Anybody have anything? I'm going to probably pick people close so I can hear you. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, I will. What does the research say about single fathers is the question. And there isn't a lot of that. I think that research is being done now because until recently there weren't so many single fathers and not so many stay-at-home dads. So those are both growing quickly now. So I didn't come across much that addressed the question of single fathers or stay-at-home dads. Yes. So question is, what about same-sex marriages? So there is research on those kids, and basically the kids are fine. There's been a lot of study. You're shocked, I can see. There's been a lot of study that hasn't found anything remarkable about the kids of gay parents. So I think that's probably a good thing. One of the things I looked at briefly was whether I have a pair of dads who have a son who's in my son's class, and so I asked them, and I actually interviewed a few other people too for the book, and said, is one of you kind of the dad and one of you kind of the mom, or how does that work? And it turns out that with gay couples, it's a mix. So one of this couple that's friends of ours, one of the dads does most of the cooking, and the other doesn't like to cook. But other things are mixed up in other ways. So what's happening in those families, I think, is they're inventing new roles that get away from the gender stereotypes that have some truth to them in a lot of families. And so I think my view is we're going to learn a lot from gay families about how to reorganize things in our families so that we don't fall into those stereotypical roles. So we got to start the movie. How does that sound? Who's ready for the movie? Thank you very much.